Hello, thank you for joining me again at Bert's Books. This time, again, I haven't really scripted anything. I'm just going to ad-lib about what I've been reading, or at least started to read in recent weeks. First off, an old staple from, God, when was this? 1980? When was this from? 1978. Piranha by John Sayles. Major film, it claims there. It was a film. I can't. I think I've seen it. I can't remember, to be honest. It might be the sequel I'm thinking of. Anyway, this was ubiquitous when I was a kid, and I suppose in the aftershock from Jaws, you just had this spate of, I won't say cash-ins, but of that genre, aquatic peril sort of novels. And what next from sharks but piranhas, which had already been a staple in, I remember them in those Tarzan films, which I think is geographically unlikely because Tarzan's in Africa and piranhas aren't supposed to be. But, they were a staple of those old black and white Tarzan films. Someone will fall in a river and there'll be all these and bones come up, whatever. But this one starts, I suppose this is kind of a classic mode of a horror film plot or horror fiction, that a couple decide they're going to trespass on a US Army test site, authorised personnel only. Hey, there's no one to stop us. Let's go. And there's this pool. You can probably put the rest of the plot together from that. But, I'm laughing at it, but that basic premise, the US Army have been buggering around on something, and that has resurfaced since. I think The Mist is one such, and there's probably numerous others. But anyway, it's a tacky thing really, but all good fun. A bit of non-fiction. Something prompted me to revisit this recently, and I'm trying to think what it was that made me pick this up again. It's been probably a couple of decades since I read it. It came out, I think, around 97-ish. The Wrestling by Simon Garfield, which at the time dealt with, as far as the English side of that sport went, it had sort of sunk, it had gone in 20 years from being a highlight of people's Saturday afternoons. It was the TV slot, I think after World of Sport, or at the end of World of Sport, and supposedly would, in its heyday, pull these audiences of millions. But by the time this came out, in Britain, it had been relegated to this kind of church hall sort of real cheapy, on its knees type of entertainment. Although a version of it had taken off in the States, a far glitzier incarnation of it. But this looks back at that classic British kind of 60s, 70s phase of it, and it's basically most of it was these kind of big, slightly out of condition pie-eating men grunting around in spandex. But it had a strange, I used to watch, it was the only sport I really bothered watching as a kid. Aspects of this, I suppose, have dated rather awkwardly, most notably the presence of Jimmy Savile in this, who I think he's depicted quite early on. There we go, guys and girls, who weirdly had, I'm not sure how serious he was about it or whether it was a gimmick. In British wrestling, I suppose in American wrestling as well, probably, that the idea is that you have two sorts of character. There's a heel, who is the villain, and there's a blue eye, which is the kind of one the mums all like. And you can bear in mind the front row would usually be these obnoxious old grannies kind of shouting, "Kill, kill!" But they'd kind of, they'd root after the blue eyes, and believe it or not, Jimmy Savile was considered a blue eye. There's nothing so strange as the mainstream sometimes. Incidentally, it may give some viewers as a gratification to learn that professional, actual, real wrestlers did not go gentle on Jim, and after one match, his testicles had to be coaxed back down from his bodily cavity. And it really, when examined in print, it it really is quite bizarre. You know, it interviews a lot of the old characters from it, and goes into, I suppose, some of the behind the scenes tensions within it. You got I guess that's Kendo Nagasaki on the cover there, whose gimmick was that he was masked, and I think he was ceremonially unmasked at one point, which wasn't a good career move for him. But very interesting read still. So what else? Well, this is the first of two books I'm going to talk about today, which are written by people I know to a greater or lesser degree. A License to Rock and Pop, an Inventory of Attitude by James Fry, or Jim as I know him. Jim I sometimes run into in the supermarket. But anyway, this, when was this published? Quite recently, I think it was this year or last year. Forward by St Etienne's Bob Stanley, and dedicated to Tony Ogden, the late Tony Ogden and the late Nick Sanderson. Now, I've got a slightly guilty conscience here because, sorry Jim, I didn't buy this new. I got this second hand, and it's one that you seem to have signed and dedicated to someone who obviously decided to sell it on. Now, the guilty parties, I shall refrain from naming them, but I expect a bribe. Get in touch. I want money. Jim need never find out who you are. Anyway, as the title suggests, it takes the form of I suppose a parodic or semi-parodic guide to success in this field, and it's similar in tone. It reminded me in a way, it's got that kind of for schools and colleges textbook sort of feel about it, and it reminded me a bit of there was that comedy series about 15 or 20 years ago called Look Around You, which was a skit on kind of 70s educational television, and it's I suppose it's almost like a companion piece to that in a way. There's a lot of this book belongs to, and I think there's a questionnaire, and the idea is that once you've completed it, you send off, and Jim will give you a certificate of some sort at the end of it. I don't know if I'm going to get around to that. I might try and bribe Jim just to give me one anyway. But so it starts. It takes its kind of base camp point, and this will surprise a lot of people because most people will sort of be thinking, well, rock and roll, you want rock and pop, that they'd maybe sort of look at Elvis or one of the 50s rockers or blues men before that, or maybe a jazz musician or so, or a 50s film star or something as the kind of start-off point. Jim takes this well-known image of the famous Victorian engineer and all-round genius Isambard Kingdom Brunel, and argues and makes the case this one of the most important photographs of the 19th century, an icon and a fashion photograph in the truest sense, and then dissects the various aspects of it that make this a sort of visual signifier to rock and roll attitude, I suppose. Mud on boots. Obviously Brunel was one of the boys. You just know those boots could stand alone and tell their own story. The owner is not afraid of hard work. He leads by example, etc., etc. So it goes on in that vein. It's very entertaining. I think there probably are sort of notes of truth within it, however. So it's not entirely satirical, but it takes various sort of rock and roll or pop milestones and makes cultural connections or joins threads, sometimes transcending centuries, as it points out here. Jim discusses the relationship between the famous Caravaggio image and the photo of David Bowie simulating a gamma hoosh on Mick Ronson's guitar, and Mick not even breaking stride there as it happens. So it's full of very entertaining things like this. One favourite of mine, I mean, resonating with, I suppose, my own musical tastes. We focus in on the sleeve art of the New York Dolls 1973 debut album. And Jim points out, these 5 individuals appear to be relaxing at home during a break after playing pop music, perhaps taking some drugs before meeting their record company. They may well have. Are they really individuals? This image offers the viewer the ultimate gang experience because they choose to define themselves as a singular object, a band, through costume and makeup across a fluid gender spectrum. So yeah, and it goes into a bit of detail. It sort of examines each figure in the photo here, of which I believe there's only now one. So it's only David Johansson in the centre there. It's only David that's still with us, who I met once incidentally. He was entertaining sort of character. And this particular chapter rather echoes, I remember how I felt at school about being forced into team games, etc. And this chapter 10 is titled make what you will of that one, but yeah, it's very entertaining, quite confrontational. But at the end, you fill in the questionnaire and so on. So it's worth a look. But unlike me, go and buy a new one, so Jimbo will get a royalty, and I won't need to feel guilty next time I run into him in the supermarket. And next up, A Year in the Country, Lost Transmissions by Stephen Prince. Now, Steve Prince is I sort of know him, but I haven't seen him in a long time. He's not someone that I run into in the supermarket. I'm trying to think when I last would have run into him. Probably over 10 years ago, but I kind of knew him. I think he was sort of active in the capacity of he was an active photographer back then, but he's since then kind of gone into this field of, I suppose loosely speaking, we're talking hauntology here, and he's produced a number of books as well as recordings on this theme, and I admittedly have been a bit slack until now into actually sort of going and checking them out, but I finally got around to it. So I've just started on this. Now, hauntology, I sort of like the sound of it, but it's a definition I'm still struggling with, and the sort of early chapters of this go into this a bit. It does argue that it's a sort of rather fluidly defined area, but it's if my understanding of it right, it's sort of some sort of intersection between, and I think this is particularly endemic with my generation in England or Britain, that if you feel yourself to be slightly haunted by the notion of a progressive future that you've been cheated out of. In other words, that if you were at school in that period in the 70s, early 80s, you would have absorbed, if you were watching things like Tomorrow's World, or if you were reading I Spy books and so on, you would have absorbed, I suppose, a lot of signposts to what should have been a more progressive future than the way it's really turned out. So there's a kind of I remember the future aspect of this. You're kind of hankering for that other more progressive kind of turn in the road that we, as it turned out, didn't take, thanks neoliberalism. So it's kind of an intersection between that and the fascination with folk horror, I suppose. So if you were reading I Spy books but were watching those scary kids TV things like Children of the Stones, I guess maybe that puts you in that hauntological kind of area. But yeah, early days. Yeah, this seems to cover very diverse kind of subject areas, but I suppose a bit like Jim's book, makes these little sort of cultural connections or historical connections in a way. So if you're out there, Steve, it's been a long time. I'll hopefully run into you at some point soon, but I haven't forgotten you. So I'm enjoying the first couple of chapters of this as far as I've got, and then it goes into sort of one of the early chapters talks about, I think I've seen a couple of episodes of this 70s TV, rather an obscure 70s TV science show, Leap in the Dark, which attempted to deal in a sober sort of way with the sort of growing fascination with the occult and supernatural that was occurring in that time. And I think these things sort of tie in with a dissatisfaction with the status quo or accepted thinking. So sort of blossom during those times when there's some sort of crisis going on. So cyclically, I guess we always end up back there, don't we? But anyway, so yeah, so food for thought, a lot of this. Anyway, so that's my last few weeks reading. I hope yours has been similarly interesting. And thank you again for joining me. And we will catch up soon, I'm sure.